Chapter 3. A shift happened in our family when I reached the age of 7. My parents were told about a Christian community in Malmö, a city only 25 minutes away. Apparently, there was a group of zealous followers of Jesus who felt compelled to spread the good news to those that needed it the most. About 20 families had moved into the poorest part of the city. Their goal was to shine the light of Jesus and to make a difference in the lives of their neighbors. My parents were intrigued. This was exactly what they'd been looking for since those early days in the Jesus house. Being part of a community, living out the gospel, and shining the light of Jesus into the darkness. The leaders of the community came to visit us. They were a family with 5 children, 5 powerful children. In fact, the most powerful of them all was Johanna, the youngest 7-year-old girl. She happened to be exactly my age. We spent the whole day together as families, and 2 things happened that day. My parents decided that we were going to move to Malmö to be part of this exciting new community. And the other thing that happened was that I fell under the spell of a new friend. The best way I can describe it is how Annika would have felt the day Pippi Longstocking moved in next door. Absolute awe and wonder. Who was this person? How could I ever match the wild glint in her eyes? Would she ever see me as an equal? As far as I was concerned, our departure from Lund to Malmö was a mixture of excitement and fear. Moving a family of 6 is never an easy task. Moving a family of 6 with a heavily pregnant mother seems unfathomable, except in the context of my mother. She packed boxes, cleaned rooms, moved furniture, and didn't stop to even consider letting someone else do the job. It's no surprise that on the actual night of the house move, my mother's water broke and she went into labor. My dad had to find his way to the hospital in a new city while trying to drive a moving truck. He was so flustered that when he stopped to ask for directions from a passing pedestrian, he forgot to put the handbrake on, and the truck started to roll back down the hill. Thankfully, my mother managed to find the handbrake and stop the truck before causing any damage. Our first morning in Malmö, we woke to the news that we had another little brother. Ezra arrived 6 years after Sam was born, so he had 4 older siblings doting on him. The neighborhood we moved into was very different to the university town we had moved from. There was a harshness that I wasn't used to, and I knew that it wasn't long before I was going to start school. Thankfully, I wasn't starting alone, as Johanna would be in the same class as me, and I knew that with her as my friend, no harm would come to me. We quickly became a force to be reckoned with. During the months before I started school, our only rule was to be home before dinner time. We had hours of freedom to explore and find adventures. Our parents had no idea how far we used to go on our bicycles, since we never felt restricted to staying within our neighborhood. With Johanna there always had to be an element of risk. A bike race to the city meant weaving between buses and cars and seeing who could reach the tallest building first. We both knew it would be Johanna. It always was, but I didn't mind. I got to be her sidekick, and I loved every moment of our time together. We used to search for brick walls that we could jump off every time Yuyu, as I called her, would need a higher wall to prove herself on. Sometimes we would join the other kids in the neighborhood with their games. While marbles were fun to play, there was a more exciting game on offer in the sandpit, pocket knife Russian roulette. We would stand in a circle, feet apart, and take turns flicking our pocket knife as close as we could to someone's foot. The idea of the game was whoever flinched and moved their foot was out. How I came away from my childhood with no foot injuries is beyond me. I look back at me as a 7-year-old flicking a pocket knife at someone's foot and just shake my head. Once autumn arrived, we started school. Having Yuyu by my side made this yet another adventure. I remember our parents telling us that we had to be a light to the school. I wasn't exactly sure what that meant, but I had a feeling that it might be connected to us wearing clothes that stood out from the rest of the other students. We had patches on our knees and jackets with extra pockets sewn on. Yuyu even had underwear made from old t-shirts. I was almost jealous. The older our clothes looked, the more we could shine our light for Jesus. By the time winter came around, I was practically beaming as me and Yuyu would walk around the school grounds, showing our love of Jesus by having snowsuits covered in patches. We were different to the rest. We were going to heaven. If only those kids with new clothes could be saved from hell and start wearing worn-out hand-me-downs. Our parents struggled with the school system. Not only did it mean that their kids were exposed to classmates with different values to them, it also meant that we were offered sex education in school. There was no way this was going to happen to me and Yuyu. So now, not only did I have an exemption from eating the blood pudding in the school cafeteria on Wednesdays, supposedly this had something to do with this new word that I heard my parents using with the school principal, Jewish. We were Jewish and I could not eat blood. This was news to me. My dad's blood phobia was solved by using the I'm Jewish card. I had no idea what it meant, but was happy to eat the overcooked carrots and peas instead. But now I got to sit in the library with Yuyu while the rest of our class got exposed to the dark side during sex educational lessons. I'm fairly sure our library sessions weren't supervised because I have memories of the two of us giggling over diagrams of naked bodies. We obviously didn't quite understand that this was exactly what our parents were trying to keep us away from, or maybe we did. My days in school were long and boring. Our teacher was a bitter woman who had no intention of making learning interesting. I would spend the long hours at school, drifting away in my mind, looking at the clock, counting the minutes until me and Yuyu could break free. After a couple of years of attempting to keep their daughters uncontaminated by the world, our parents decided they had enough of the public school system. What good could secular education offer their pure daughters? Surely homeschooling was safer and a much better use of our time. I was thrilled. I now got to spend my whole week at Yuyu's house with her mother Elsa as our teacher. I loved Elsa, and I knew Elsa had a special place in her heart for me. Elsa was an author who wrote inspiring Christian books for children. Missionary adventures around the globe were a favorite topic. Having us homeschooled was a perfect setup for an author. Elsa could write her books while us girls looked after the house. I'm pretty sure we had one workbook each. It could possibly have been used once or twice in my year with Elsa, although it's hard to recall doing any actual schoolwork. What I do know is that my formal education stopped abruptly in grade 3. My days were now spent in more valuable domestic pursuits. And anyway, who needed education? We were pretty sure that Jesus would return at any stage, probably before Christmas. Why waste our time studying when we would be taken up to heaven and live in glory? Education was not for us. It was for the masses who were all going to burn in hell. Our days were filled with cleaning tasks. Hours were spent in the basement laundry where we would wash clothes and sheets and then use the giant rolling machine to flatten the bedding. Yuyu's two-story apartment had to be scrubbed from top to bottom. After all, her parents were the pastors of the community, and their home was also used for weekly meetings. Their 5 children all had chores. I shared Yuyu's list, and I had no issues with this at all. It meant more time with her, and the quicker we completed the list, the more time we had for our own adventures. Baking was a daily event. We had complete access to the kitchen pantry, and we would spend hours baking up a storm. Broom handles would be balanced across chairs and tables and benches, and we would drape biscuits across them. We perfected cinnamon rolls. The trick was to use a whole slab of butter for every batch. We would smear it on, the thicker the better. Our main quest was to find the gooeyest mud cake recipe. It got to a point where it was no longer about baking the cake, but all about the batter. We would make a bowl full with a spoon each and gobble it down. We also used our baking as a way to communicate our values. Cakes were baked for families we liked in the community as a means to be able to visit them. Knocking on someone's door with a cake in our hands became a regular event. The other things we liked to do with our baking was to teach Yuyu's very proud dad a lesson. Björn was an imposing figure. He took his role as pastor very seriously and he demanded respect. Yuyu and I weren't that convinced. We could see his cracks and we had every intention of bringing them to the attention of everyone else who seemed to think he was a man of honor. One of our favorite things to make was chocolate bowls. It was a delicious mix of butter, sugar, oats, coconut, cocoa, and coffee. This mix was rolled into balls and covered in shredded coconut, a very Swedish treat. I'm not sure which one of us had the brilliant idea first, but we both worked hard to play a trick on Yuyu's dad. We made one of the balls enormous, much bigger than the rest. We then poked a a hole into it and filled it with every spice item from the pantry: chili powder, pepper, garlic flakes, and Tabasco sauce. We then covered up the hole and rolled the ball in coconut as usual. The chocolate balls were plated and brought to the table after family prayer time. Björn was always offered the food first in the family, and just as we had predicted, he reached for the largest chocolate ball on the plate. His greed had made him such an easy target. He hadn't even finished his first bite when his face exploded with color I had yet to see again. There was no way the two of us were going to risk sitting around and wait for Björn's. So we ran from the table and jumped on our bikes. I remember pedaling away, looking behind me to see if Yuya's brother was following us, and realizing we hadn't thought about this part of the equation. We had been so intent on teaching Björn a very important lesson that we had overlooked the follow-up. It took a few days for me to return to their house, and I suspect those days were pretty tender for Yuya's bottom. Yuya's family was my escape from home. I tried my very best to graft myself into her family, so hopefully they wouldn't notice that I was there. The longer I could stay, the better. The longer I could avoid being at home with my family, the more peaceful I felt. For most of the year, it was possible for me to spend every moment of the day with Yuyu and her family until it was dinner time and I had to go home and join my own family. However, summers were different. Much to my horror, Yuyu's family would spend their summers doing Christian ministry in Romania. They would fill up their caravan with bags of clothes, and then as I stood there fighting back the tears at not being invited to join them, they would wave goodbye as they drove off. I was devastated. Life without Yuyu at the helm was grim. There was no way I could spend my days with my family. I needed something to do. I needed an escape. I knew that as long as I was home by dinner time, no one would ask where I was, so I would pack my bathing suit and towel and wait for the bus to the city. There was nothing in me that thought it was strange to be traveling on my own to the city swimming center. Once at the pool, I would wade into the water and then lay there just floating. Absolute bliss. I was totally at peace. No brothers holding me down, trying to tickle me until I farted. No dad raging. No sister stabbing her nails into my scalp. Just me and the ceiling. I would float for hours, my skin shriveled and my mind in another place. The church that we were going to with this new fellowship group was different to what I had experienced in the hospital chapel back in Lund. The songs hit a spot in me that was unfamiliar. They triggered a longing in me. Jesus was referred to as a friend, or at times even as a lover. It was so intimate. When I focused on these words in the songs, I felt the surge in my chest and a longing for something I had yet to experience. Jesus wanted me and me alone. He wanted all of my heart. He wanted to search every part of it, and he wanted to be with me. He was pursuing me. These concepts were beyond my comprehension, but the longing and the feelings were there. Now when I was getting lost in my own thoughts as I floated in the pool or as I trolled through deep mud, I would start making up these fantasies, grand love stories that were intoxicating. There were times I was counting the hours until bedtime so I could be alone in my thoughts. I would often work on the same storyline for weeks at a time, tweaking it each night I replayed it. I would add scenarios and perfect the details. The stories all had the very similar themes of longing, separation, transformation, and redemption. I loved adding extra scenes. Rain always featured in one of them. Lots and lots of rain. Of course, I was the leading lady in these fantasies. I was adventurous and brave and living out my life of sacrifice. And while the stories spanned the globe and the scenarios would change, the man in the story was always the same. He was there to protect me. He was steady and safe. He was absolutely besotted with me. Just like Jesus, who wanted to search my heart and know every part of me, so did the man of my dreams. He wouldn't settle at knowing the bare essentials. Instead, he wanted to know it all. He wanted to know me, all of me. He would patiently wait as I had my adventures. He longed for me, and nothing would stop him from pursuing me. I wanted these stories so much. I held them in my heart and never spoke about them to anyone, not even Yuyu. When I was 9 years old, my sister Abigail was born. We had wished for another baby in the family and had even stood outside our parents' bedroom door late at night with a vacuum cleaner pipe and spoke into it in our most godlike voice, telling them to have another baby. Incredibly, our efforts paid off, and we now had another sister. It meant that we had 3 girls and 3 boys in the family, halfway to having the 12 tribes of Israel, according to my dad. As far as I was concerned, life was good. I spent my days with my best friend. Our attempted schoolwork was a faded memory now, replaced with full-time baking and chores. Our attempted schoolwork was, double lines. Our adventures became even more exciting with the addition of a tandem bike. It meant that Yuyu, her 2 sisters, the neighbor's daughter, and me could all fit on one bike if we balanced correctly. We could now experience our travels and adventures as one unit. The tandem bike took us down to the cold beach and often to the local water tower that loomed over the horizon like a giant spaceship. Our only formal education was spent learning about the Bible and memorizing verses. I remember Elsa even offered us an ice cream cone if we could recite a Psalm of David by the end of the week. We had it memorized within a couple of days. Yuyu mentioned to me that she was going to be baptized along with her sisters. Why hadn't I thought of that? Being baptized was the ultimate sign that you wholeheartedly believed in the Bible. I didn't want to miss out. I wanted my eternal salvation to be directly linked with Yuyu's salvation. I told my parents that I wanted to be baptized. They were pleased but wanted to know if I fully understood what it meant. Did I love Jesus? Was he in my heart? Had I asked for forgiveness for my sinful life? Was I willing to leave my past behind and pick up my cross and follow Jesus? Oh man, now that they put it that way, I wasn't so sure. I didn't feel like a bad person. I wasn't really sure what exactly I needed to be forgiven for. Did I love Jesus? When I thought about it, I didn't really know. I wanted to love him. I wanted to be his friend. But now that I gave it some proper thought, I realized that I had no idea who he was. The songs we sang about him made me feel wonderful. I heard that he wanted to be in a relationship with me, but I didn't really know what that meant. All this was too hard to explain to my parents, and I really wanted to wear that white gown and go into the water with my best friend. A few weeks later, I had my chance. Yuyu and her sisters went first. One by one, they waded into the baptismal pool in front of the church. The minister held each one in turn and asked them something quietly and then pulled them back into the water. It was then my turn. I waded almost knee-deep into the water when I remembered that I was actually very scared of having someone else holding me in the water. When I was about 3 years old, a woman that was looking after me and my siblings had taken us to the pool and thought it was hilarious dropping me in the deep part of the pool and watching me struggle to keep my head above water. The baptismal pool I was now in was deep, really deep. In fact, the water had reached all the way up to Yuyu's neck, and she was much taller than me. I got down to the last step of the baptismal pool and had to keep my head back as far as I could as I walked forward, and I still had water going into my mouth. The minister asked me something to do with Jesus, and I quickly said yes, not really caring about what it meant anymore. I just wanted to get out. The white gown had ballooned around me. I was too focused on not drowning to remember if I had kept my underwear on when I changed into the gown. The minister tried to pull me back into the water, but the gown was in the way. I was spluttering. There was nothing profound about the moment I got baptized. I was just grateful to be alive. A short time after being baptized, a traveling preacher came to visit our community. He held nightly meetings in the basement of the apartment blocks where we were invited to come along. After one of the meetings, he asked for the children to come forward to be prayed for. We all stood in a line as he laid hands on us. When it was my turn, he was quiet for a long time. And then, instead of praying for me, he just started talking. He asked if I knew about Esther in the Bible, the woman who won a beauty competition and saved her nation. Of course I knew the story. It was my favorite. The preacher explained to me in great detail through the interpreter that I was going to be like Esther. I was going to bring salvation, not just to my nation, but to many nations. My beauty would win me favors, and I had a very important task waiting for me. Me, this chubby, short girl? What on earth was he talking about? I was pretty stunned by the message, and as I walked home that evening, I asked Yuya what had happened to her when she got prayed for. Surely, if anyone was going to be Esther, it was her. Yuya was beautiful, with long honey-colored hair, tan skin, and legs that seemed to never end. No, nothing had been said about Esther. Yuya had been prayed for, and that was it. How bizarre, I thought, that the preacher could get it so wrong. In the summer of 1984, our family had yet another big shift. This came about when my dad attended a Christian conference in Norway. While there, the main speaker, Derek Prince, took my dad aside and explained to him that God had a direct command for the Jewish people, and that was to return to the land of their forefathers. My dad was confused. Surely being a Christian meant a completely new life that had nothing to do with his Jewish past. He had found his truth in Jesus Christ. Derek explained that Christianity without its Jewish roots is an empty religion and that true Christianity embraces Judaism. The two complete each other. Jesus was in fact Yeshua, his mother Miriam, his father Joseph. Yeshua was in fact the long-awaited for Jewish Messiah. Derek went on to say that as a Jewish man with a Christian faith, my dad was in fact a complete Jew. He was no longer waiting for his Messiah. For the first time in his life, my dad saw his Jewish roots in a positive light. He now saw them in the context of his relationship with Jesus. Being Jewish was no longer something to run away from and no longer something to ignore. It now tied in with his salvation. Dad came back from Norway with, if it was possible, a newfound fervor. His daily Bible reading took on a new intensity. He read the Psalms with a new perspective. The chosen people were meant to return to the land, the Holy Land, that tiny strip of land in the Middle East where he was nearly stabbed so many years before. That place was in fact his birthright, and God commanded him to go. We all knew something was brewing, yet we couldn't exactly put our finger on it. The only actual difference was that a badly photocopied paper with the Hebrew alphabet was taped to the toilet wall, and we were told to read it as we went ahead with our business. A few months later, I suspect with the financial support of Derek Prince, we waved our dad goodbye as he went off to scout the Holy Land. He returned 3 weeks later, and before even taking his jacket off, he announced we were moving to the Holy Land. It was God's command for the Jewish people to return to the land. Jewish. There it was again, that word. I knew it had something to do with the Bible and me not eating blood pudding at school. Besides that, the word meant nothing to me. And Israel? Where was that? Again, I knew it was a country from the Bible. I knew they wore sandals and robes there. My mind was buzzing. I was moving to Israel? But I was Swedish. I was home. I had mormor and morfar, and I had Yuyu. Why would I want to move to Israel just because some man called Derek Prince said we were meant to? My mother seemed to share my views. For the first time ever, I saw a look come across her angelic face, a look of defiance. She was not moving to Israel with her 6 children. This was lunacy. According to my dad, she had no choice. As my father was the head of the house, my mother had to submit. Of course, how could she forget? She was the woman. My mother's response was to pray and fast. With 6 children, aged 13, 11, 9, 8, 3, and 1, my mother stopped eating and instead spent her time reading her Bible and praying for an answer. Thankfully, within 10 days of fasting, the answer came in the passage from the book of Ruth. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you go, I will follow. The words were burning on the page. And so, at the end of February 1985, my mother boarded a plane and spent 1 week in Jerusalem trying to get her head around the fact that a few months later, she would be moving her 6 children to this totally foreign world. The date was set. July 10th, 1985 was chosen as the day that, according to my dad, we would leave our meaningless existence behind in Sweden and step into God's will by moving to the Holy Land. There was no preparation for us kids. I do remember my dad telling us that we would eat giant avocados and watermelon, and when that wasn't enough of a draw card, he explained that once we settled, we would go on a camel trek through the desert. That didn't seem too bad, I thought. Now that my dad mentioned the desert, I remembered the pyramids. And wait, the Israelites, they had something to do with Egypt. Oh, no, we were moving to Israel, the land of the pyramids. I was so excited. Imagine being able to climb the pyramids. Maybe Yuyu could come and visit me and we could explore the pyramids together. My sister Susanna wouldn't be swayed by avocados or camels or the supposed pyramids. She was devastated. I watched her sink deeper and deeper over the next couple of months, and I couldn't understand why my parents didn't seem to do anything about it. It was a very scary time. As the deadline approached, our apartment slowly became emptier. Our neighborhood had lots of Romani families living there, as was fairly common in southern Sweden. It made life that little bit more interesting. Our home was on the ground floor, and most mornings when we stepped outside, we would find a collection of items that had been flung from the above apartments. Forks, pieces of clothing, toys, and the most common of all, chicken carcasses. I would reach for my bike, only to have to remove a chicken bone that had become wedged in the wheel. We were lucky, though. Our next-door neighbors had furniture thrown down from the families upstairs. When their toddler daughter nearly got hit by an incoming armchair, they ended up building a wire net to catch the missiles. The Romanis were befriended by my mother, and our belongings were being given away to them. I didn't mind so much. I wasn't really attached to any of our things, or so I thought. It turns out that I was. The kitchen table vanishing was really quite shocking to me. There was something so wrong about coming home one day and not having a table to sit around. This was real. We were actually leaving. Our lives would never be the same. I can only remember 2 goodbyes. Hugging Mormor and Morfar, them cursing my father under their breath and telling us they would never come and visit. And saying goodbye to Elsa. Oh, Elsa. I felt her love so much. She told me that she had something to tell me as she put me on her lap and held me close. She was so soft and warm. She knew this was hard for me and that I didn't want to move. She told me that there are things that happen that we don't understand and that she knew amazing things lay ahead of me and I would make book-worthy adventures of my own one day. I heard her. This was the first time anyone had acknowledged me, seen my pain in this, and spoken about my feelings. I was leaving my country, and no one up until now seemed to care. In a daze, I told her I loved her and that I would come back to her. I was wrong. I never did get to see her again, and I never got to thank her for her steady love during a very difficult time in my life. A couple of days later, I boarded the ferry with my family to Copenhagen, arrived at the airport, checked in our luggage, and stepped onto a plane, something I had never done before. The first part of my life was officially over.